The topic that I want to share with you today, and I know I just have a short amount of time because I'm meeting with the provost at 1 o'clock, so I got to get done by then. I can't miss that meeting. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what Richard started talking about, but maybe in a little bit more academic sense, just because of the academic work that I did in relation to my dissertation and where I was trying to go with it. And I think it's kind of an important thing to share, not only with the Indigenous artists here, but for the arts community. I think about captikʷЛ imagery in Okanagan oral story. And the reason that I think about it that way is the way that the language works. The idea of captikʷЛ is what I really want to focus on, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means, because I want to place it in terms of what the language is about, and talk about how language constructs the way that our thinking is and our ethics are. And that's, I think, really an important aspect for not only performance artists and theater artists, but visual artists, to understand that language is a way in which we move people to a better place, and that for Indigenous people, many Indigenous peoples, it is a way to bring balance and healing to our community. And so in our language, the idea of imagery is really an important one. That becomes expressed in our arts. So, do you want to go to the next slide? Okay, here's me. There I am picking huckleberries, which I was doing, and I didn't get off the mountain until midnight last night, so I'm a little crazy, that's why. That's my granddaughter there. We're picking huckleberries, and up there we're picking Saskatoon berries on our land. And there is a shot at an Alkin Center with myself and Chief Enius, my nephew, and we're talking with teaching young children there, but there's all ages, mostly adults. It's an adult learning center, but it uses the adults to talk to the young people as part of their programming, which I think is really important part of intergenerational transmission of arts and performance and language and ethics, especially, that are part of that. Go to the next slide. I just wanted to mention that the Okanagan Syilx people, you see that one part in the middle there? We're right in the middle. We're in the middle of things. All of those white areas there represent 25 of our Syilx peoples. That means that at one time there was just one group of our people, and they evolved into 25 different language groups. And at least we know from archaeology and linguistics that at least 12,000 since the receding of the ice from this part of the territory. But from our people, we know it was before that, and we know that we migrated north from the south. There's many stories of place names that are much more south, and peoples that are much more south than us in our stories. And so go to the next slide. So I just wanted to create that context about how old that language is. I'm not going to go too much into this part, but one of the linguists, Art Kuipers, who studied all 25 of those languages, created a dictionary of all the meaningful morphemes that exist, say, in the Tlekapunk, the Sikwapunk, the Squamish, and all the tribes of them, Syilx peoples, even the coastal tribes. All the meaningful morphemes, their prefixes, suffixes, and infixes, and created a dictionary of what would be most likely the original language, because all these sounds from all these 25 languages and meanings all are part of that original, are constant in all of them. And so I think that's really an important aspect of what I want to talk about. And the reason that I mention that is not for linguistic purposes, but the fact that when you think about a language that's been informed by this land and the lands that our Syilx peoples occupy, in the two biggest river systems in North America, the Fraser River system and the Columbia River system. The Syilx people encompassed those two river systems. And they live together, and they live together in peace. One of the early anthropologists that came through and studied most of the coastal peoples all along North America. He mentioned that for the Syilx peoples it was remarkable because even though they were autonomous groups from each other, they appeared to absolutely get along. They had big festivals where 15, 20 tribes would get together and there was never any warring between them, and they traded, they intermarried with all 25 tribes, and there was constant trade and travel between our 25 tribes. And one of the things those anthropologists are saying, but they don't appear to have any form of structural governance. Yeah, we don't have any form of structural war governance because we got along and we figured out how to do that, and that's the most efficient and economical way to live with your neighbors over those 12,000 years or more. Go to the next slide. So I just wanted to talk specifically about what I know best is the Okanagan Syilx language. And I do understand 4 of the other Syilx languages and can get along pretty good in 2 of them. But these are Syilx morphemes that, as I said, was there for 12,000 years for sure, because they're in every one of them. And there's like a dictionary of them, huge dictionary. But these are examples. The idea of many spreading out from one source, that concept is an active, abstract, knowledgeable concept about when you translate it over into the Okanagan or the Shuswap or the Tlahtlapan, the word Tamihu exists in all those languages. And it means land, or the spirit of the land, or the life force of the land, the living things all collectively and interdependence on the land. It means all of those things, all from one source. That's a pretty deep concept, but the construct is a visual image in our minds. How it looks in our minds creates a systems view of the whole system, and our being a part of that, because we are Tamihu too. They're not Tamihu, we're Tamihu. We're part of that. We're part of that whole system in terms of how it regenerates itself constantly, that we're so lucky to be part of, and we're so fortunate as Syilx people to live in this construct of other Syilx peoples who see that same concept and who are dedicated and committed to that concept. If you look at the word Timhula underneath here, on the Syilx side, you can see the small Tamihu. When we use our language, we drop a syllable if there's other sounds that come after it. So that Tamihu moves down into our word specifically for the earth, like the mountains, the rivers, the waters, the things that are inanimate, whereas Tamihu includes all of those things. So what does that mean when you think about the actual meaning of that? When you're looking at ul, which means cyclic movement, continuous cycles, it means that our people can actually see in the word the life cycles of every living thing, the seasons, the day and night, the winter to spring to summer to fall, the many generations of changes that happen through forest cycles, growth and burning and regrowth and so on, the populations of various animals or insects or birds, and then the collapse of them and then the regeneration of them. All of those cycles are seen in that word, Timhula. So it doesn't mean the land as objects, as mountains or rivers or rocks or whatever. It means an active, physical, continuing force of regeneration that's always moving in cycles. And that's a very clear picture in that word. And when you look at the word la, ala means right here. If I said, Bill, chuika la, right? And then he would know that I want him to come here, not go over there, right? Ala means here, la. So when you put that together with that XW sound, if you see that XW sound at the back end of that mich, that's that movement outward, right? That idea of like the sound, it tells you in the sound what that XW is about. So if you look at that whole word, it constructs a visual knowledge of what we mean when we're talking about the environment, when we're talking about the land, when we're talking about traditional ecological knowledge. In those two simple examples of two words. And if you look at the many, 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 many words, which I could cover here and be non-stop forever, we'll go to the next slide. One of the things about Tamik, as I mentioned, is that the whole of the Syilx ethic is constructed because we can see what that means. It's not just a word. It has an active component, a visual component, which can be expressed visibly in visual format. It can be expressed not only in visual format, it can be expressed in our winter dance, as my brother Richard put it. You see it in the powwow that we now have adopted from our wonderful people over the Rockies, that is healing to many of our communities now because it presents that same cyclical movement of everyone moving together with it. And so that's what our winter dance does for us. It helps us to remind ourselves the meaning of that word, to make that we are part of that, and that we're not, in control of it or own it or possess it or have a right to destroy even one living thing that's been there for thousands of years before us. Let's move to the next one. This is I don't know if you can read that, but I'll read it out. The word Canucks, individual, is the first central part, and then Nuxilt, you hear that same word Nux. Nuxilt means one family group, and then Nuktswilt, and you hear that ilt in there, that's generations. It means generations of children. So those who are generations of families with us, so that's community. The intergenerational aspect of it is really clearly portrayed in that. And then of course the Timkulak and how we're all nested, embedded in that system. We're not separate from it. We're a part of family, we're a part of community, and we're a part of land. And our interactions in terms of how those concentric rings are nested on top of each other is all founded on the land. The foundation of us is the land. The foundation of our flesh is the land. Go to the next one. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about captikʷł and I'll just look at the time here, about 10 minutes, yeah. So the idea of captikʷł, that's another word I think that's really quite exciting to share and to talk about. And I wanted to mention that captikʷł for our people is very, very clearly a documentation system. That's what I spent a lot of time working on my dissertation, to lay out how it does that, how text is created in captikʷł, and how you can penetrate the meaning of our stories, because there's layers of meaning because of the way the language constructs those images, and how those images interact with each other, and also symbolically and metaphorically how they work with each other. Tell a whole different story in the bottom layers if you're Okanagan. So you can see the surface story, but also there's many other layers of story underneath that because of the way that imagery works. And what I like to call, in terms of the way that the Tamih are portrayed in our stories, the animal people, they're called by my great aunt Mourning Dove. She says they were somewhere between human and animal. They were not animals, they were not humans. And so in our tradition, what we know and understand is that the idea of spirit is very different than what the Western mind thinks about it. The Western mind thinks about it in the scientific terms, in terms of whether or not spirit is real or exists, or it's just in the mind. So there's a big separation there, way back when in the philosophers about phenomenology, right? And so one of the things that they talk about is that everything is just a manifestation of our thinking, how we see the world and so on. We think about it in kind of the opposite direction. And we think about that idea of captikʷЛ informing us of how the world actually works around us, how those regenerative relationships work around us. And in our words and in our stories, that's what is being played out, so that it forms what Anthony Mattina, one of the linguists, said, a collective circle of knowledge, right? So it's layered like that and acts as a feedback loop. So when the stories are told in the language related to the land that you're in, with the people that are knowledgeable and acting in a certain way, it acts as a feedback loop to the next generation. So they're extremely important. And language is extremely important for all Indigenous peoples for that very reason. We can spend a lot of money digging up little chips and artifacts and putting them in a museum. That's not going to do any good. We need to really be clear that the best artifacts are the Indigenous languages. That's where the knowledge of our systems thinking, that's where the knowledge of everything that our planet needs right now is located. And we have to make that clear as artists. We have to make that clear as people who are in academics and as knowledge keepers and so on. So the land teaching story guides sustainable protocols, and the community gratitude observances that we all participate in as Indigenous people institutionalize it. So when we do our ceremonies, they're not for show. They're institutionalizing our ethics toward the land, toward what the Creator gave us, toward everything that we see and use in those contexts. When we have something that's sacred, what Richard was talking about, it's within that context. And to hold it sacred means that the next generation will hold it sacred, because they're going to hold the land sacred, and they're going to hold the things that they do to the land sacred. So that's really extremely an important part of the ethic. Let's go to the next one. The Four Chief story is one that I looked at in my dissertation. I looked at a number of stories, but this was the one that I looked at because it lays out the foundation of our understanding that everything isn't good in society or in nature or anything else. There is always going to be a number of dynamic things that happen that cause change to happen, that cause the old ways to fall apart, and so on. And so this story is layered deeply, and if you want to know more about it, read my dissertation. I'm actually turning it into a book, so it'll be a little bit easier to read. That way it's not so thick. But the idea is what Richard talked about, the land law, that the new person is all of us. It's not just Indigenous people. The new person is the human among all the other living things. That they require gratitude toward all the other living things, and they require an active way of perceiving it, an active way of knowing about it, and an active way of participating with them in that regeneration ceremonially. And like Richard said, our parents and grandparents, all the Okanagan people know this. My family were spiritual people. My mother was a medicine woman. My uncle was a really well-known medicine person who could heal using things that science says doesn't exist, but which we know different in terms of how certain things work in this universe. And you know, I have a science mind, and I was, you know, I don't call it a gift. It was really hard for me to deal with that all my life because it makes you skeptical about everything. And so I did a lot of questioning about this, and I've always come to the same conclusion: they are right. Let's go to the next one.
You've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes? Good, that's perfect. So the Four Chiefs story actually identifies a visual model of dynamics, of oppositional forces that actually are in balance when everything is working properly. So if we, and they're given different names, of course, like Syilx, 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 and captikʷł. If you look at Syilx as the elder, and if you look at Syilx as bitterroot, right, the one holding on to the ground and staying in one place and using everything that's there in order to be as beautiful as we are on this land. So you think about all those concepts. That's just a couple of things. And you look at Syilx, the Saskatoon berry, the fact that it is a whole package of little seeds that is a promise that there's going to be generations after generation of food and new life and beautiful Saskatoon berries. Right? That seed is what a Saskatoon berry represents, the future. Change, innovation, new things all the time. And captikʷł, the chief salmon, the one that struggles, starts out like this, easy road all the way down to the big ocean. But once it gets there, it starts bringing in all these nutrients, all these beautiful things that we need and that other things need on this land, and it struggles every molecule of the way against the current. Every single drop of water is telling it, go the other way, it's easier. Everybody's going that way. It tells us that kind of perseverance is necessary, that kind of work to bring that home to our people, to ensure their survival is necessary. So these are sacred storytellers that tell us how we need to be, how we need to think, how we need to work together. The traditions one, Syilx, tells us how we need to keep our ceremonies and be fierce about it, not be reticent and worried about it. Be fierce about our beautiful ceremonies that respect everything that creation is about. Next one. And of course there's an Alkin center, the 4 poles that uphold our sky and setting on the back of the turtle who brought peace to our people. This is one of our stories, the turtle story and eagle story. You'll find it in Theta's books. I think Greg Younging is there. But you'll find that book. And I know that the 4 chief story is in there as well. And you can also take a course here. You can also go to a beautiful Anaukin Center. You don't have to take it for university credit. You can also take it in the National Professional Arts Training Program that Tracy back there can tell you more about. She's recruiting right now, so I said I would mention that. But it's a beautiful place for young artists, emerging artists to come to, and it's generously supported by a number of Canadian Heritage, Canada Council of the Arts, and a number of other programming areas. So we're always very proud of it. Let's go to the next one. So these are some of the ideas behind it. I'm not going to go too much into this because I only have 30 seconds left. But you can see what those four dynamic polarities are about in terms of permanency, for instance, and traditions versus change. You can see that in any society. All the people who want to keep things the way they are, and then all the people who want to change are always clashing. And then if you look at those that want their independent action, they don't want to have to ask anybody anything. And then those that need collaborative relationship making, networking, and all of that, those are always coming into clash. So to be balanced, to take a balanced approach, the Okanagan story explains step by step how to accomplish that in a community, in a society, and also in mediation where there's really serious clashes. And so I wanted to mention that it's not just those visual things, but it also sets out in very clear visual format some of those things that are really necessary for us as society to learn. And of course we use it also as an inquiry methodology, and I teach it as a methodology course here. Oh, next one, last one I think. That's it. This is just, you don't have to be able to read that, but that's in my dissertation. It gives you an idea of some of the layers of use of that idea of the Timhula when the Timih, and then those four dynamics and how they work out in society as an environmental process within our community, if everything is working right. So I always think we have to with the whole world in order to make change happen. So I'm a real proponent of that. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's
You're actually
the last one.
late. So.